Chapter 11. Mutiny of the Anunnaki. After Enlil arrived on Earth in person, quote, Earth Command, end quote, was transferred out of Enki's hands. It was probably at this point that Enki's epithet or name was changed to Ea, quote, Lord Waters, end quote, rather than, quote, Lord Earth, end quote. The Sumerian texts explain that at this early stage in the arrival of the gods on Earth, a separation of powers was agreed upon. Anu was to stay in the heavens and rule over the 12th planet, Enlil was to command the lands, and Enki was put in charge of the Apsu in Akkadian. Guided by the, quote, watery, end quote, meaning of the name Ea, scholars have translated Apsu as, quote, watery deep, end quote, assuming that, as in Greek mythology, Enlil represented the thundering Zeus, and Ea was the prototype of Poseidon, god of the oceans. In other instances, Enlil's domain was referred to as the upper world, and Ea's as the lower world. Again, the scholars assumed that the terms meant that Enlil controlled Earth's atmosphere, while Ea was ruler of the, quote, subterranean waters, end quote. The Greek-like Hades the Mesopotamians supposedly believed in. Our own term, abyss, which derives from Apsu, denotes deep, dark, dangerous waters in which one can sink and disappear. Thus, as scholars came upon Mesopotamian texts describing this lower world, they translated it as Unterwelt, quote, underworld, end quote, or Totenwelt, quote, world of the dead, end quote. Only in recent years have the Sumerologists mitigated the ominous connotation somewhat by using the term netherworld in translation. The Mesopotamian texts most responsible for this misinterpretation were a series of liturgies lamenting the disappearance of Dumuzi, who is better known from biblical and Canaanite texts as the god Tammuz. It was with him that Inanna/Ishtar had her most celebrated love affair, and when he disappeared, she went to the lower world to seek him. The massive Tammuz Liturgen und Verwandt by P. Morris Witzel, a masterwork on the Sumerian and Akkadian, quote, Tammuz texts, end quote, only helped perpetuate the misconception. The epic tales of Ishtar's search were taken to mean a journey, quote, to the realm of the dead and her eventual return to the land of the living, end quote. The Sumerian and Akkadian texts describing the descent of Inanna/Ishtar to the lower world inform us that the goddess decided to visit her sister Ereshkigal, mistress of the place. Ishtar went there neither dead nor against her will. She went alive and uninvited, forcing her way in by threatening the gatekeeper. If thou openest not the gate so that I cannot enter, I will smash the door, I will shatter the bolt, I will smash the doorpost, I will move the doors. One by one, the 7 gates leading to the abode of Ereshkigal were opened to Ishtar. When she finally made it, Ereshkigal saw her. She literally blew her top, the Akkadian text says, quote, burst at her presence, end quote. The Sumerian text, vague about the purpose of the trip or the cause of Ereshkigal's anger, reveals that Inanna expected such a reception. She took pains to notify the other principal deities of her journey in advance and made sure that they would take steps to rescue her in case she was imprisoned in the, quote, great below, end quote. The spouse of Ereshkigal, and the lord of the lower world, was Nergal. The manner in which he arrived in the great below and became its lord not only illuminates the human nature of the, quote, gods, end quote, but also depicts the lower world as anything but a, quote, world of the dead, end quote. The tale, found in several versions, begins with a banquet at which the guests of honor were Anu, Enlil, and Ea. The banquet was held, quote, in the heavens, end quote, but not at Anu's abode on the 12th planet. Perhaps it took place aboard an orbiting spacecraft, for when Ereshkigal could not ascend to join them, the gods sent her a messenger who, quote, descended the long staircase of the heavens, reached the gate of Ereshkigal, end quote. Having received the invitation, Ereshkigal instructed her counselor, Namtar, quote, ascend, Namtar, the long staircase of the heavens. remove the dish from the table, take my share. Whatever Anu gives to thee, bring it all to me. End quote. When Namtar entered the banquet hall, all the gods except, quote, a bald god seated in the back, end quote, rose to greet him. Namtar reported the incident to Ereshkigal when he returned to the lower world. She and all the lesser gods of her domain were insulted. She demanded that the offending god be sent to her for punishment. The offender, however, was Nergal, a son of the great Ea. After a severe reprimand by his father, Nergal was instructed to make the trip alone, armed only with lots of fatherly advice on how to behave. When Nergal arrived at the gate, he was recognized by Namtar as the offending god and led into, quote, Ereshkigal's wide courtyard, end quote, where he was put to several tests. Sooner or later, Ereshkigal went to take her daily bath. She revealed her body. What is normal for man and woman, he and his heart, they embraced. Passionately, they got into bed. For 7 days and nights, they made love. In the upper world, an alarm had gone out for the missing Nergal. Quote, release me, end quote, he said to Ereshkigal. Quote, I will go and I will come back, end quote, he promised. But no sooner had he left than Namtar went to Ereshkigal and accused Nergal of having no intention of coming back. Once more, Namtar was sent up to Anu. Ereshkigal's message was clear. I, thy daughter, was young. I have not known the play of maidens. That God whom you didst send, and who had intercourse with me. Send him to me, that he may be my husband, that he might lodge with me. With married life perhaps not yet in his mind, Nergal organized a military expedition and stormed the gates of Ereshkigal, intending to, quote, cut off her head, end quote. But Ereshkigal pleaded, quote, be thou my husband, and I will be thy wife. I will let thee hold dominion over the wide lower land. I will place the tablet of wisdom in thy hand. Thou shalt be master, I will be mistress, end quote. And then came the happy ending. When Nergal heard her words, he took hold of her hand and kissed her, wiping away her tears, quote, what thou hast wished for me since months past, so be it now, end quote. The events recounted do not suggest a land of the dead. Quite the contrary. It was a place the gods could enter and leave, a place of lovemaking, a place important enough to be entrusted to a granddaughter of Enlil and a son of Enki. Recognizing that the facts do not support the earlier notion of a dismissal region, W.F. Albright, of Mesopotamian Elements and Canaanite Eschatology, suggested that Dumuzi's abode in the lower world was, quote, a bright and fruitful home in the subterranean paradise called the Mouth of the Rivers, which was closely associated with the home of Ea and the Apsu, end quote. The place was far and difficult to reach, to be sure, and a somewhat, quote, restricted area, end quote, but hardly a, quote, place of no return, end quote. Like Inanna, other leading deities were reported going to and returning from this lower world. Enlil was banished to the Abzu for a while, after he had raped Enlil. And Ea was a virtual commuter between the Eridu and Sumer and the Abzu, bringing to the Abzu, quote, the craftsmanship of Eridu, end quote, and establishing in it, quote, a lofty shrine, end quote, for himself. Far from being a dark and desolate place, it was described as a bright place with flowing waters. A rich land, beloved of Enki, bursting with riches, perfect in fullness, whose mighty river rushes across the land. We have seen the many depictions of Ea as the god of flowing waters. It is evident from Sumerian sources that such flowing waters indeed existed, not in Sumer and its flatlands, but in the great below. W.F. Albright drew attention to a text dealing with the lower world as the land of Uttu, quote, in the west, end quote, of Sumer. It speaks of a journey of Enki to the Apsu. To thee, Apsu, pure land, where great waters rapidly flow, to the abode of flowing waters. The Lord betakes himself, the abode of flowing waters. Enki in the pure waters established, in the midst of the Apsu, a great sanctuary he established. By all accounts, the place lay beyond a sea. A lament for, quote, the pure sun, end quote, the young Dumuzi reports that he was carried off to the lower world in a ship. A, quote, lamentation over the destruction of Sumer, end quote, describes how Inanna managed to sneak aboard a waiting ship. Quote, from her possessions she sailed forth. She descended to the lower world, end quote. A long text, little understood because no intact version has been found, deals with some major dispute between Ira, Nergal's title as Lord of the Lower World, and his brother Marduk. In the course of the dispute, Nergal left his domain and confronted Marduk in Babylon. Marduk, on the other hand, threatened, quote, to the Apsu will I descend, the Anunnaki to supervise. My raging weapons against them I will raise, end quote. To reach the Apsu, he left the land of Mesopotamia and traveled over, quote, waters that rose up, end quote. His destination was Arali in the, quote, basement, end quote, of Earth, and the texts provide a precise clue as to where this, quote, basement, end quote, was. In the distant sea, 100 beru of water away, the ground of Arali is. It is where the blue stones cause ill, where the craftsman of Anu the silver axe carries, which shines as a day. The beru, both of land measuring and a time reckoning unit, was probably used in the latter capacity when traveling over water was involved. As such, it was a double hour, so that 100 beru meant 200 hours of sailing. We have no way of determining the assumed or average sailing speed employed in these ancient distant reckonings. But there is no doubt that a truly distant land was reached after a sea voyage of over 2,000 or 3,000 miles. The texts indicate that Arali was situated west and south of Sumer. A ship traveling 2,000 to 3,000 miles in a southwesterly direction from the Persian Gulf could have only one destination, the shores of southern Africa. Only such a conclusion can explain the terms of lower world as meaning the southern hemisphere, where the land of Arali was, as contrasted with the upper world, or northern hemisphere, where Sumer was. Such a division of Earth's hemispheres between Enlil, northern, and Ea, southern, paralleled the designation of the northern skies as the way of Enlil and the southern skies as the way of Ea. The ability of the Nephilim to undertake interplanetary travel, orbit Earth, and land on it should obviate the question to whether they could possibly have known of southern Africa, besides Mesopotamia. Many cylinder seals, depicting animals peculiar to the area, such as a zebra or ostrich, jungle scenes, or rulers wearing leopard skins in the African tradition, attest to an, quote, African connection, end quote. What interest did the Nephilim have in this part of Africa, diverting to it the scientific genius of Ea and granting to the important gods in charge of the land a unique, quote, tablet of wisdom, end quote. The Sumerian term, Abzu, which scholars have accepted to mean, quote, watery deep, end quote, requires a fresh and critical analysis. Literally, the term meant, quote, primeval deep source, end quote, not necessarily of waters. According to Sumerian grammatical rules, either of two syllables of any term could precede the other without changing the word's meaning, with the result that Abzu and Zuab meant the same thing. The latter spelling of the Sumerian term enables identification of its parallel in the Semitic languages, for Zaab was always meant and still means, quote, precious metals, end quote, specifically, quote, gold, end quote, in Hebrew and its sister languages. The Sumerian pictograph for Abzu was that of an excavation deep in earth, mounted by a shaft. Thus, Ea was not the lord of an indefinite, quote, watery deep, end quote, but the god in charge of the exploitation of earth's minerals. In fact, the Greek abyssus, adopted from the Akkadian apsu, also meant an extremely deep hole in the ground. Akkadian textbooks explain that, quote, apsu is nikbu, end quote. The meaning of the word and that of its Hebrew equivalent, nikba, is very precise. A deep, man-made cutting or drilling into the ground. P. Jensen of Die Kosmologie der Babylonier observed back in 1890 that the often countered Akkadian term bit nemiku should not be translated as, quote, house of wisdom, end quote, but as, quote, house of deepness, end quote. He quoted a text, VR 30, 49-50 AB, that stated, quote, it is from bit nemiku that gold and silver come, end quote. Another text, IIIR 57, 35 AB, he pointed out, explained the Akkadian name, quote, goddess Shala of Namiki, end quote, was the translation of the Sumerian epithet, quote, goddess who hands down the shining bronze, end quote. The Akkadian term, Nemiku, which has been translated as, quote, wisdom, end quote, Jensen concluded, quote, had to do with metals, end quote. But why, he admitted simply, quote, I do not know, end quote. Some Mesopotamian hymns to Ea exalt him as Bel Nemiki, translated, quote, Lord of Wisdom, end quote. But the correct translation should undoubtedly be, quote, Lord of Mining, end quote. Just as the tablets of destinies at Nippur contained orbital data, it follows that the tablet of wisdom entrusted Nergal and Erishkigal was in fact a, quote, tablet of mining, end quote, a, quote, databank, end quote, pertaining to the mining operations of the Nephilim. As lord of the Abzu, Ea was assisted by another son, the god Jabil, quote, he who burns the soil, end quote, who was in charge of fire and smelting. Earth's smith, he was eventually depicted as a young god whose shoulders emit red-hot rays or sparks of fire, emerging from the ground or about to descend into it. The texts state that Jabil was steeped by Ea in, quote, wisdom, end quote, meaning that Ea had taught him mining techniques. The metal ores mined in southern Africa by the Nephilim were carried back to Mesopotamia by specially designed cargo ships called Magur, Urnu, Abzu, quote, ship for ores of the lower world, end quote. There, the ores were taken to Bad Tabira, whose name literally meant the foundation of metalworking, end quote. Smelted and refined, the ores were cast into ingots whose shape remained unchanged throughout the ancient world for millennia. Such ingots were actually found at various Near Eastern excavations, confirming the reliability of the Sumerian pictographs as true depictions of the objects they, quote, wrote, end quote, out. The Sumerian sign for the term Zag, quote, purified precious, end quote, was a picture of such an ingot. In earlier times, it apparently had a hole running through its length, through which a carrying rod was inserted. Several depictions of a god of the flowing waters showed him flanked by bearers of such precious metal ingots, indicating that he was also the lord of mining. The various names and epithets for Ea's African land of mines are replete with clues to its location and nature. It was known as Arali, quote, place of the shiny lodes, end quote, the land from which the metal ores come. Inanna, planning her descent to the southern hemisphere, referred to the place as the land where, quote, the precious metal is covered with soil, end quote, where it is found underground. Inanna, planning her descent to the southern hemisphere, referred to the place as the land where, quote, the precious metal is covered with soil, end quote, where it is found underground. A text reported by Erica Reiner, listing the mountains and rivers of the Sumerian world, stated, quote, Mount Arali, home of the gold, end quote. and a fragmented text described by H. Radu confirmed that Arali was the land on which Bad Tabira depended for its continued operations. The Mesopotamian text spoke of the land of mines as mountainous, with grassy plateaus and steppes, and lush with vegetation. The capital of Ereshkigal in that land was described by the Sumerian text as being in the Gab Kara, quote, in the chest of the mountains, end quote, well inland. In the Akkadian version of Ishtar's journey, the gatekeeper welcomes her. Enter, my lady. Let Kutu rejoice over thee. Let the palace of the land of Nugia be glad at thy presence. Conveying in Akkadian the meaning, quote, that which is in the heartland, end quote, the term Kutu, in its Sumerian origin, also meant, quote, the bright uplands, end quote. It was a land, all texts suggest, with bright days, awash with sunshine. The Sumerian terms for gold, kuji, quote, bright out of earth, end quote, and silver, kubabar, quote, bright gold, end quote, retain the original association of the precious metals with the bright ku domain of Ereshkigal. The pictographic signs employed as Sumer's first writing reveal great familiarity not only with diverse metallurgical processes, but also with the fact that the sources of the metals were mines dug out into the earth. The terms for copper and bronze, quote, handsome bright stone, end quote, gold, quote, the supreme mined metal, end quote, or, quote, refined, end quote, also, quote, bright purified, end quote, were all pictorial variants of a mine shaft, quote, opening / mouth for dark red, end quote, metal. The land's name, Arali, could also be written as a variant of the pictograph for, quote, dark red, end quote, soil, of Kush, quote, dark red, end quote, but in time meaning, quote, negro, end quote, or of the metals mined there. The pictographs always depicted variants of a mine shaft. Extensive references to gold and other metals in ancient texts suggest familiarity with metallurgy from the earliest times. A lively metals trade existed at the very beginnings of civilization, the results of knowledge bequeathed to mankind by the gods, who, the texts state, had engaged in mining and metallurgy long before man's appearance. Many studies that correlate Mesopotamian divine tales with the biblical pre-diluvial list of patriarchs point out that, according to the Bible, Tubal-Cain was an, quote, artificer of gold and copper and iron, end quote, long before the deluge. The Old Testament recognized the land of Ophir, which was probably somewhere in Africa, as a source of gold in antiquity. King Solomon's ship convoys sailed down the Red Sea from Ezion-Geber, present-day Elath, quote, and they went to Ophir and fetched from thence gold, end quote. Unwilling to risk a delay in the construction of the Lord's temple in Jerusalem, Solomon arranged with his ally, Hiram, king of Tyre, to sail a second fleet to Ophir by an alternate route. And the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish, with the navy of Hiram. Once every 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and monkeys. The fleet of Tarshish took 3 years to complete a round trip, allowing for an appropriate time to load up at Ophir. The voyage in each direction must have lasted well over a year. This suggests a route much more roundabout than a direct route via the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, a route around Africa. Most scholars locate Tarshish in the western Mediterranean, possibly at or near the present Strait of Gibraltar. This would have been an ideal place for which to embark on a voyage around the African continent. Some believe that the name Tarshish meant, quote, smeltery, end quote. Many biblical scholars have suggested that Ophir should be identified with present-day Rhodesia. Z. Herman of People's Seas Ships brought together evidence showing that the Egyptians obtained various minerals from Rhodesia in earliest times. Mining engineers in Rhodesia, as well as in South Africa, have often searched for gold by seeking evidence of prehistoric mining. How was the inland abode of Ereshkigal reached? How were the ores transported from the, quote, heartland, end quote, to the coastal ports? Knowing of the reliance of the Nephilim on river shipping, one should not be surprised to find a major, navigable river in the lower world. The tale of, quote, Enlil and Ninlil, end quote, informed us that Enlil was banished to exile in the lower world. When he reached the land, he had to be ferried over a wide river. A Babylonian text dealing with the origins and destiny of mankind referred to the river of the lower world as River Habur, the, quote, river of fishes and birds, end quote. Some Sumerian texts nicknamed the land of Erishkigal the, quote, prairie country of Habur, end quote. Of the four mighty rivers of Africa, one, the Nile, flows north into the Mediterranean. The Congo and Niger empty into the Atlantic on the west, and the Zambezi flows from the heartland of Africa in an eastward semicircle until it reaches the east coast. It offers a wide delta with good port sites. It is navigable inland and over a distance of hundreds of miles. Was the Zambezi the, quote, river of fishes and birds, end quote, of the lower world? Were its majestic Victoria Falls the waterfalls mentioned in one text as the site of Erishkigal's capital? Aware that many, quote, newly discovered, end quote, and promising mining sites in southern Africa had been mining sites in antiquity, the Anglo-American Corporation called in teams of archaeologists to examine the sites before modern earth-moving equipment swept away all traces of ancient work. Reporting on their findings in the magazine Optima, Adrian Boucher and Peter Beaumont stated that they had come upon layers of ancient and prehistoric mining activities and human remains. Carbon dating at Yale University and at the University of Groningen in Holland established the age of the artifacts as ranging from plausible 2000 BC to an amazing 7690 BC. Intrigued by the unexpected antiquity of the finds, the team extended its area of search. At the base of the cliff face on the precipitous western slopes of Lion Peak, a 5-ton slab of hematite stone blocked access to a cavern. Charcoal remains dated the mining operations within the cavern at 20,000 to 26,000 BC. Was mining for metals possible during the Old Stone Age? Incredulous, the scholars dug a shaft at a point where, apparently, the ancient miners had begun their operations. A charcoal sample found there was sent to the Groningen laboratory. The result was a dating of 41,250 BC, give or take 1,600 years. Southern African scientists then probed prehistoric mine sites in southern Swaziland. Within the uncovered mine caverns, they found twigs, leaves, and grass, even feathers, all presumably brought in by the ancient miners as bedding. At the 35,000 BC level, they found notched bones which, quote, indicate man's ability to count at that remote period, end quote. Other remains advanced the age of the artifacts to about 50,000 BC. Believing that the, quote, true age of the onset of mining in Swaziland is more likely to be in the order of 70,000 to 80,000 BC, end quote. The two scientists suggested that, quote, Southern Africa could well have been in the forefront of technological invention and innovation during much of the period subsequent to 100,000 BC, end quote. Commenting on the discoveries, Dr. Kenneth Oakley, former head anthropologist of the Natural History Museum in London, saw quite a different significance to the finds. Quote, it throws important light on the origins of man. It is now possible that Southern Africa was the evolutionary home of man, end quote. The, quote, birthplace, end quote, of Homo sapiens. As we shall show, it was indeed there that modern man appeared on Earth through a chain of events triggered by the God's search for metal. Both serious scientists and science fiction writers have suggested that a good reason for us to establish settlements on other planets or asteroids might be the availability of rare minerals on those celestial bodies, minerals that might be too scarce or too costly to mine on Earth. Could this have been the Nephilim's purpose in colonizing Earth? Modern scholars divide man's activities on Earth into the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and so on. In ancient times, however, the Greek poet Hesiod, for example, listed 5 ages: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Except for the heroic age, all ancient traditions accepted the sequence of gold, silver, copper, iron. The prophet Daniel had a vision in which he saw, quote, a great image, end quote, with a head of fine gold, breasts and arms of silver, belly of brass, legs of iron, and extremities or feet of clay. Myth and folklore abound with hazy memories of a golden age, mostly associated with the time when gods roamed Earth, followed by a silver age, and then the ages when gods and men shared Earth, the age of heroes, of copper, bronze, and iron. Are these legends in fact vague recollections of actual events on Earth? Gold, silver, and copper are all native elements of the gold group. They fall into the same family in the periodic classification by atomic weight and number. They have similar crystallographic, chemical, and physical properties. All are soft, malleable, and ductile. Of all known elements, these are the best conductors of heat and electricity. Of the three, gold is the most durable, virtually indestructible. Though best known for its use as money and in jewelry or fine artifacts, it is almost invaluable in the electronics industry. A sophisticated society requires gold for microelectronic assemblies, guidance circuitry, and computer, quote, brains, end quote. Man's infatuation with gold is traceable to the beginnings of his civilization and religion, to his contacts with the ancient gods. The gods of Sumer required that they be served food from golden trays, water and wine from golden vessels, and that they be clad in gold garments. Though the Israelites left Egypt in such a hurry that there was no time for them to let their bread leaven, they were ordered to ask the Egyptians for all available silver and gold objects. This command, as we shall find out later, anticipated the need for such materials to construct the tabernacle and its electronic accoutrements. Gold, which we call the royal metal, was in fact the metal of the gods. Speaking to the prophet Haggai, the Lord made it clear, in connection with his return to judge the nations, quote, "The silver is mine and the gold is mine," end quote. The evidence suggests that man's own infatuation with these metals has its root in the great need of the Nephilim for gold. The Nephilim, it appears, came to Earth for gold and its related metals. They may also have come for other rare metals, such as platinum, abundant in southern Africa, which can power fuel cells in an extraordinary manner. And the possibility should not be ruled out that they came to Earth for sources of radioactive minerals, such as uranium or cobalt. The lower world's, quote, blue stones that cause ill, end quote, which some texts mention. Many depictions show Ea, as the god of mining, emitting such powerful rays as he exits from a mine that the gods attending him have to use screening shields. In all these depictions, Ea is shown holding a miner's rock saw. Though Enki was in charge of the first landing party in the development of the Abzu, credit for what was accomplished, as the case should be with all generals, should not go to him alone. Those who actually did the work, day in, day out, were the lesser members of the landing party, the Anunnaki. A Sumerian text describes the construction of Enlil Center in Nippur. Quote, "The Anunna, gods of heaven and earth, are working. The axe and the carrying basket, with which they laid foundation of the cities, in their hands they held," end quote. The ancient text describes the Anunnaki as the rank-and-file gods who had been involved in the settlement of Earth, the gods, quote, "who perform the tasks," end quote. The Babylonian, quote, Epic of Creation, end quote, credited Marduk with giving the Anunnaki their assignments. The Sumerian original, we can safely assume, named Enlil as the god who commanded these astronauts. Assigned to Anu, to heed his instructions, 300 in the heavens he stationed as a guard, the ways of earth to define from the heaven and on earth. 600 he made reside. After all their instructions had ordered, to the Anunnaki of heaven and of earth he allotted their assignments. The text reveal that 300 of them, the, quote, Anunnaki of heaven, end quote, or the Gigi, were true astronauts who stayed aboard the spacecraft without actually landing on Earth. Orbiting Earth, these spacecraft launched and received the shuttlecraft to and from Earth. As chief of the, quote, Eagles, end quote, Shamash was a welcome and heroic guest aboard the, quote, mighty chamber in heaven, end quote, of the Ajiji. A quote, hymn to Shamash, end quote, describes how the Ajiji observes Shamash approaching in his shuttlecraft. At thy appearances, all the princes are glad. All the Ajiji rejoice over thee. In the brilliance of thy light, their path, they constantly look for thy radiance. Open wide is the doorway entirely. The bread offerings of all the Ajiji await thee. Staying aloft, the Ajiji were apparently never encountered by mankind. Several texts say that they were, quote, too high up for mankind, end quote, as a consequence of which, quote, they were not concerned with the people, end quote. The Anunnaki, on the other hand, who landed and stayed on Earth, were known and revered by mankind. The texts that state, quote, the Anunnaki of heaven are 300, end quote, also state that, quote, the Anunnaki of Earth are 600, end quote. Still, many texts persist in referring to the Anunnaki as the, quote, 50 great princes, end quote. A common spelling of their name in Akkadian, Anunnaki, readily yields the meaning, quote, the 50 who went from heaven to earth, end quote. Is there a way to bridge this seeming contradiction? We recall the text relating how Marduk rushed to his father Ea to report the loss of a spacecraft carrying, quote, the Anunnaki who are 50, end quote, as it passed near Saturn. An exorcism text from the time of the third dynasty of Ur speaks of the Annuna Eridu Nenubi, quote, the 50 Anunnaki of the city of Eridu, end quote. This strongly suggests that the group of the Nephilim who founded Eridu under the command of Enki numbered 50. Could it be that 50 was the number of Nephilim in each landing party? It is, we believe, quite conceivable that the Nephilim arrived on Earth in groups of 50. As the visits of Earth became regular, coinciding with the opportune launching times of the 12th planet, more Nephilim would arrive. Each time, some of the earlier arrivals would ascend in an Earth module and rejoin the spaceship for a trip home. But, each time, more Nephilim would stay on Earth, and the number of the 12th planet astronauts who stayed to colonize Earth grew from the initial landing party of 50 to the, quote, 600 who on Earth settled, end quote. How did the Nephilim expect to achieve their mission, to mine on Earth its desired minerals and ship the ingots back to the 12th planet with such a small number of hands? Undoubtedly, they relied on their scientific knowledge. It was there that Enki's full value becomes clear. The reason for his, rather than Enlil's, being the first to land, reason for his assignment to the Abzu. A famous seal now on exhibit at the Louvre Museum shows Ea with his familiar flowing waters, except that the waters seem to emanate from, or be filtered through, a series of laboratory flasks. Such an ancient interpretation of Ea's association with waters raises the possibility that the original hope of the Nephilim was to obtain their minerals from the sea. The ocean's waters do contain vast quantities of gold and other vital minerals, but so greatly diluted that highly sophisticated and cheap techniques are needed to justify such, quote, water mining, end quote. It is also known that the seabeds contain immense quantities of minerals in the form of plum-sized nodules, available if only one could reach deep down and scoop them up. The ancient texts refer repeatedly to a type of ship used by the gods called Alipu Tabiti, quote, sunken ship, end quote, what we now call a submarine. We have seen the, quote, fishmen, end quote, that were assigned to Ea. Is this evidence of efforts to dive the depths of the oceans to retrieve their mineral riches? The land of the mines, we have noted, was earlier called Arali, quote, place of the waters of the shiny lodes, end quote. This could mean a land where gold could be river panned. It could also refer to efforts to obtain gold from the seas. If these were the plans of the Nephilim, they apparently came to naught. For, soon after they established their first settlement, the few hundred Anunnaki were given an unexpected and most arduous task: to go down into the depths of the African soil and mine the needed minerals there. Depictions that have been found on cylinder seals show gods at what appear to be mine entrances or mine shafts. One shows Ea in a land where Jabil is above ground, and another god toils underground on his hands and knees. In later times, Babylonian and Assyrian texts disclose men, young and old, were sentenced to hard labor in the mines of the lower world. Working in darkness and eating dust as food, they were doomed never to return to their homeland. This is why the Sumerian epithet for the land, Kernugia, acquired the interpretation, quote, land of no return, end quote. Its literal meaning was, quote, land where gods who work in deep tunnels pile up the ores, end quote. For the time when the Nephilim settled Earth, all the ancient sources attest, was a time when man was not yet on Earth, and in the absence of mankind, the few Anunnaki had to toil in the mines. Ishtar, on her descent to the lower world, described the toiling Anunnaki as eating food mixed with clay and drinking water fouled with dust. Against this background, we can fully understand a long epic text named, after its opening verse, as was the custom, quote, when the gods, like men, bore the work, end quote. Piecing together many fragments of both Babylonian and Assyrian versions, W.G. Lambert and A.R. Millard of Atrahasis, the Babylonian Story of the Flood, were able to present a continuous text. They reached the conclusion that it was based on earlier Sumerian versions, and possibly on an even earlier oral traditions about the arrival of the gods on earth, the creation of man, and his destruction by the deluge. While many of these verses hold only literary value to their translators, we find them highly significant, for they corroborate our findings and conclusions in the preceding chapters. They also explain the circumstances that led to the mutiny of the Anunnaki. The story begins in the time when only the gods lived on Earth. When the gods, like men, bore the work and suffered the toil of the gods was great. The work was heavy, the distress was much. At that time, the epic relates, the chief deities had already divided the commands among themselves. Anu, father of the Anunnaki, was their heavenly king. Their Lord Chancellor was the warrior Enlil. Their chief officer was Ninurta, and their sheriff was Anuji. The gods had clasped hands together, had cast lots and divided. Anu had gone up to heaven, left the earth to his subjects. The seas enclosed as with a loop. They had given to Enki, the prince. 7 cities were established, and the text refers to 7 Anunnaki who were city commanders. Discipline must have been strict, for the text tells us, quote, the 7 great Anunnaki were making the lesser gods suffer the work, end quote. Of all their chores, it seems, digging was the most common, the most arduous, and the most abhorred. The lesser gods dug up the riverbeds to make them navigable. They dug canals for irrigation, and they dug in the Apsu to bring up the minerals of Earth. Though they undoubtedly had some sophisticated tools, the text spoke of the, quote, silver axe which shines as the day, end quote. Even underground, the work was too exacting. For a long time, for 40, quote, periods, end quote, to be exact, the Anunnaki, quote, suffered the toil, end quote. And then they cried, no more. They were complaining, backbiting, grumbling in the excavations. The occasion for the mutiny appears to have been a visit by Enlil to the mining area. Seizing the opportunity, the Anunnaki said to one another, let us confront the chief officer, that he may relieve us of our heavy work. The king of the gods, the hero Enlil, let us unnerve him in his dwelling. A leader or organizer of the mutiny was soon found. He was the, quote, chief officer of old time, end quote, who must have held a grudge against the current chief officer. His name, regrettably, is broken off, but his inciting address is quite clear. Quote, now, proclaim war. Let us combine hostilities and battle, end quote. The description of the mutiny is so vivid that scenes of the storming of the Bastille come to mind. The gods heeded his words. They set fire to their tools. Fire to their axes they put. They troubled the god of mining in the tunnels. They held him as they went to the gate of the hero Enlil. The drama and tension of the unfolding events are brought to life by the ancient poet. It was night, halfway through the watch. His house was surrounded, but the god Enlil did not know. Call, then observed it, was disturbed. He slid the bolt and watched. Call roused Nusku. They listened to the noise of. Nusku roused his lord. He got him out of his bed, saying, quote, "My lord, your house is surrounded. Battle has come right up to your gate," end quote. Enlil's first reaction was to take up arms against the mutineers, but Nusku, his chancellor, advised a council of the gods. Quote, "Transmit a message that Anu come down. Have Enki brought to your presence," end quote. He transmitted, and Anu was carried down. Enki was also brought to his presence. With the great Anunnaki present, Enlil arose, opened his mouth, and addressed the great gods. Taking the mutiny personally, Enlil demanded to know. Quote, "Is it against me that this is being done? Must I engage in hostilities? What did my very own eyes see? That battle has come right up to my gate?" End quote. Anu suggested that an inquiry be undertaken. Armed with the authority of Anu and the other commanders, Nusku went to the encamped mutineers. Quote, "Who is the instigator of battle?" End quote, he asked. Quote, "Who is the provoker of hostilities?" End quote. The Anunnaki stood together. Quote, "Every single one of us gods has declared war. We have our, and the excavations. Excessive toil has killed us. Our work was heavy, the distress much," end quote. When Enlil heard Nusku's report of these grievances, quote, "his tears flowed," end quote. He presented an ultimatum. Either the leaders of the mutineers be executed or he would resign. Quote, "Take the office away, take back your power," end quote, he told Anu. Quote, "And I will to you in heaven ascend," end quote. But Anu, who had come down from heaven, sided with the Anunnaki. Quote, "What are we accusing them of? Their work was heavy, their distress was much. Every day. The lamentation was heavy, we could hear the complaint," end quote. Encouraged by his father's words, Ea also, quote, "opened his mouth," end quote, and repeated Anu's summation. But he had a solution to offer. Let a Lulu, a, quote, "primitive worker," end quote, be created. Quote, "While the birth goddess is present, let her create a primitive worker. Let him bear the yoke. Let him carry the toil of the gods," end quote. The suggestion that a, quote, "primitive worker," end quote, be created so that he could take over the burden of the work of the Anunnaki was readily accepted. Unanimously, the gods voted to create, quote, "the worker," end quote, "man shall be his name," end quote, they said. They summoned and asked the goddess, the midwife of the gods, the wise Mami, and said to her, quote, "You are the birth goddess, create workers. Create a primitive worker, that he may bear the yoke. Let him bear the yoke assigned by Enlil. Let the worker carry the toil of the gods," end quote. Mami, the mother of the gods, said she would need the help of Ea, quote, "with whom skill lies," end quote. In the house of Chpt, a hospital-like place, the gods were waiting. Ea helped prepare the mixture from which the mother goddess proceeded to fashion, quote, man, end quote. Earth goddesses were present. The mother goddess went on working while the incantations were constantly recited. Then she shouted in triumph, quote, I have created. My hands have made it, end quote. She, quote, summoned the Anunnaki, the great gods. She opened her mouth, addressed the great gods, end quote. Quote, you commanded me a task. I have completed it. I have removed your heavy work. I have imposed your toil on the worker, man. You raised a cry for a worker kind. I have loosed the yoke. I have provided your freedom, end quote. The Anunnaki received her announcement enthusiastically. Quote, they ran together and kissed her feet, end quote. From then on, it would be the primitive worker, man, quote, who will bear the yoke, end quote. The Nephilim, having arrived on Earth to set up their colonies, had created their own brand of slavery, not with slaves imported from another continent, but with primitive workers fashioned by the Nephilim themselves. A mutiny of the gods had led to the creation of man. End of Chapter 11. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe for more. Also, please comment sequel below if you want to hear Book 2 of the Earth Chronicles series, The Stairway to Heaven.